Goosebumps really was part of this big explosion of anthology horror that happened towards the end of the 80s into the 90s. And there had been anthology horror aplenty before.
It's a cool thing, you know. It was definitely a cultural wave of horror, and this was just one piece of it. So it felt fun to be riding that cultural wave of horror at that age.
Greetings, loyal listeners and new recruits. I'm Drew Deach.
I'm Travis Newton.
And this is GenreVision.
GenreVision is a weekly movie club where we discuss horror films, action movies, fantasy flicks, sci-fi cinema, and more.
Happy Halloween, loyal listeners. It's the celebratory Halloween episode here at GenreVision. Always something I look forward to every year, and we hope you've enjoyed our selection of Halloween movies this month. And we're going out doing something kind of an echo of a previous episode we did. We did an episode about the television series Are You Afraid of the Dark? And this year we've decided to do an episode on Goosebumps, primarily the television show. There are 2 episodes we'll be focusing on: The Haunted Mask and The Werewolf of Fever Swamp, which are both in the first season. But I do think we should lay a little bit of groundwork just in case if anybody doesn't know what Goosebumps is, because what's interesting is it's still a viable franchise to this day.
Yeah, it's still a property that people are aware of. I'm not sure what the sort of like Gen Z and younger awareness is of it, because
it's probably just the movies.
Maybe. I mean, the Goosebumps books are still in print for the most part, for what I know, but they all have new covers, which is like, it's like, what?
A crime, yes.
Yeah, it's a crime. It's a criminal crime.
So essentially, Goosebumps was this anthology series of horror stories credited to R.L. Stein as the writer.
Credit.
Yes. I mean, look, you write this many books, somebody's ghostwriting something. But it's credited to R.L. Stein, and these were very strongly pushed to our age group when they were coming out.
Oh, yeah. I remember many Scholastic book fairs looking at Goosebumps books and merchandise.
And I think it's fair to put a little historical context onto R.L. Stein himself, who was already at that point an incredibly prolific and successful author with the Fear Street series.
Yep.
Which essentially was like the dry run for Goosebumps in some ways, except it was more directed towards a teenage audience, and it dealt with more kind of teenage premises.
Yeah, they were a little bit more, I hesitate to say risque, but they're a little racier, I guess you could say, and a little more violent.
They just felt a little more dangerous. Like
a little meaner, yeah.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. They had a little bit more of a mean streak to them, and there's certainly some mean streak in Goosebumps. But when Tales from the Crypt hit in, I believe it was 89, when they did the first kind of pilot batch of episodes, and then it got picked up as a series, Tales from the Crypt was huge. People, I think, forget how big that property was. They got 2 theatrical movies out of it, for God's sake.
Yep.
And a third one that's dumb, that just went straight to DVD. So because of that success, anthology horror kind of became this big thing that everybody was trying to mimic the success of Tales from the Crypt. And a great audience to do that for was kids, because Tales from the Crypt, while I'm sure was watched by a lot of kids, myself included, it wasn't supposed to be. And so there were a lot of offshoots trying to do their own anthology horror things specifically for kids. And Goosebumps was an incredibly successful one that started as a series of books by Scholastic, but very shortly I'm sure this was in the works when they were making this big deal for Goosebumps. There was a television show that was being contracted, and this first episode, The Haunted Mask, which I think is like book 12 or 13 or something in the original series. It's not the first Goosebumps book, but it was the first episode produced, and it was produced specifically as a Halloween special.
I remember it being a big deal. This was Halloween 1995. It was definitely a big thing for me because, I certainly read Goosebumps, but revisiting all these years later, I really wasn't sure what to expect. But all this stuff is on Netflix US right now. So this is available, it hasn't gone away, hasn't faded into obscurity. The most interesting thing about this is like just how similar a production it was to already existing formulas, notably the show Are You Afraid of the Dark, which was already, in its heyday by that time.
Well, I believe Goosebumps premiered during the last season of the original run of Are You Afraid of the Dark? Which was its 5th season. And Are You Afraid of the Dark, go listen to our episode on it, was a Canadian production. And from what it looks like, a majority of people very likely jumped over to Goosebumps. When Are You Afraid of the Dark, it looked like, okay, this was the last season. We filmed the last season. And while there are certain core people in the team of Goosebumps that I don't believe worked on Are You Afraid of the Dark, I will say I watched the entire Goosebumps series for this episode. And I will talk about some other episodes towards the end. But what was really fun for me as somebody who Are You Afraid of the Dark is a cornerstone of my love of fiction, particularly horror, is that in nearly every episode I spotted an actor that I had seen on Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Sure. Or just an actor that's like, hey, I know that person from a notable movie.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in the what is it? The Thing Under the Sink. I forget what the name of the episode is.
It came from beneath the sink.
It came from beneath the sink. Catherine Isabel from Ginger Snaps and Bones is in there. So it was like, hey.
Sure. Ryan Gosling is in the Say Cheese and Die episode. He's also in an Are You Afraid of the Dark episode.
Yep.
So, I mean, that's certainly a very fun aspect to it. But in watching them, in all honesty, structure-wise and I think storytelling goals-wise, Goosebumps and Are You Afraid of the Dark are actually very different. Are You Afraid of the Dark, the entire setup of kids sitting around a campfire telling scary stories, having that wraparound element, actually adds a kind of mood and to the Are You Afraid of the Dark episodes that isn't present in Goosebumps. Goosebumps feels a lot more direct in what it's trying to achieve for its intended audience.
Now, there are wraparounds in, I don't know how many of the Goosebumps episodes. Like, R.L. Stine does appear on screen.
It's a couple two-parters.
Okay. So, I know the first two-parter we did, there are wraparounds at the beginning and at the end. And then for, I think, Werewolf Fever Swamp, there's only one at the beginning?
No, there's in those two-parters, and the beginning of part 1, there's an R.L. Stine segment, and at the end of part 2, there's an R.L. Stine segment, in both The Haunted Mask and The Werewolf of Fever Swamp.
Yeah, I like in Are You Afraid of the Dark that the wraparounds add a bit of context and mood setting.
Yeah, well, it also created this genuine feel of like, hey, I like hanging out with these kids every week to tell scary stories.
Yes, and the sense of campfire tales. Like a campfire tale is a very specific kind of story.
Yes, and Goosebumps aren't. I mean, I'm sure there are some that you could say have a campfire tale vibe to them, but mostly the property was known for the amazing cover art done by artist Tim Jacobus, and his art is great.
Yeah, I mean, the Jacobus art on the front of the Goosebumps books was really key in selling them. It really made them leap off the shelves. I mean, it's just unforgettable art. And the fact that they've replaced it on newer publications is just, like you said, it's criminal. Like, come on. This is the iconic imagery of the series. And I was kind of, that's the one thing I think, looking at the Goosebumps series now is like, I'm kind of disappointed they didn't take more inspiration from Jacobus's art.
I agree.
Those looks are indelible. In the Goosebumps movie, at least I've only seen the first Goosebumps movie, like they do I guess I could say a better job, or at least they're more reverent of the Jacobus artwork. That seems to be like their big inspiration. Like, how can we take the Jacobus artwork and turn it into a whole bunch of CGI in a movie that people will see?
Somewhat, yeah. I mean, it feels like a little sanded down cosplay.
Yeah.
Like the design for Slappy in the Goosebumps movie is actually a lot more approachable than the Jacobus version.
Yes. Yeah, agreed.
So I think what's interesting about the show is the show on the whole is mostly a monster show.
Uh-huh.
It's mostly interested in monster stories.
Well, though they wanted to do the books that sold well, obviously. And I know that among myself and my friends, like the ones I was always most interested in are the ones with monsters on the covers.
Of course, yeah. And so that edict kind of informed the show and certainly set the foundation with the first episode, The Haunted Mask, which I just find this is a fun bit of shared experience, is that Travis and I were watching that Halloween special premiere at the same time.
Yeah.
Before we ever had any inkling each other existed. We were both at that same moment watching the same thing. And it's interesting, having watched the entire Goosebumps series, I will say that there's a darker quality to the Haunted Mask Part 1 and 2 that I think they kind of started to stray away from even immediately after. The story, a very simple story, is this young girl, Carly Beth. She's easily frightened and she gets spooked all the time at school, and it's Halloween.
She's bullied, like legit bullied.
Yes, she's legit bullied. And so for 1 year, she wants to get a really scary mask and scare her bullies. And she, of course, the episode after the R.L. Stine intro has her right in front of a novelty shop that looks oh so mysterious. And she eventually comes back to it and finds in the back room these, for a kid's show, pretty genuinely horrific masks.
Yeah, one of them looks like a Cenobite with the sort of like peeled back lips and stuff like that, where you can tell that there were like hooks supposed to be. It's pretty gruesome.
Yeah, I mean, while this was, it's interesting. I was looking this up. Goosebumps aired very shortly, I believe, before the television rating system was fully implemented. And they had their own rating on episodes, which is they called it G7, which, was just 7 up. And then eventually it became TVY7.
Right.
And so knowing that that's kind of the area of where they were trying to get kids, watching it in this first one was like, yeah, there's some mood and some design stuff in the Haunted Mask that I certainly remember being creeped out by as a kid.
Certainly. Yeah. I don't have specific memories of watching this as a kid other than knowing I did, and that I was looking forward to it. This whole revisit of it this many years later, I don't think I've seen it in its entirety since then. So it was a little bit of a rediscovery, but it was pretty much what I remembered. The interesting thing about this is that it pulls off pretty much everything it wants to do, but in the kind of like children's TV, Canadian made way that you would kind of expect from this quality of a production. It has a couple of really good things going for it though. Number one, the lead, Catherine Long, who plays Carly Beth, she actually does a pretty damn good job in this.
Mm-hmm. I mean, she's a little bit older than the majority of the lead kids that they would use in pretty much every other episode after that. But it helps. Like, she gives a genuinely committed performance. She's asked to read some terrible lines that nobody can make sound good. But overall, she sells the emotion and the sympathy of the character totally.
And no shit, the girl who plays Sabrina, her friend, the actress is Catherine Short. And Catherine is spelled the same way, Kathryn. So you got a Catherine Long and a Catherine Short.
Perfectly paired.
It's I don't know, a cute bit of casting, I guess. These Canadians in their casting, you see so many shared actors between this and Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Oh, I could spend the whole episode pointing all those out. But and they brought both of those actresses back for Haunted Mask Part 2. Or Haunted Mask 2, as they say.
Yes. So eventually Carly Beth, in wanting to get back at all the people who scare her, including her little brother, goes back to the novelty store and finds the scariest mask she can. Turns out it's in the off-limits room. The freaky, I don't know, tall, thin man, they call him, this European guy who's balding and has some sort of, I don't know, skin condition on one side of his face.
Yes, who will be familiar only to you and I as a character from Food of the Gods Part 2.
Oh, yeah.
But I believe I'm trying to look it up right now, everybody, so I'm sorry, but I believe that actor's name is Colin Fox.
It is Colin Fox, yes.
Yes, and he's a very prolific Canadian actor. So yes, Carly Beth gets into the back room, and the guy that owns this place is like, no, you can't have these masks. Like, these aren't for sale. They're spooky. And of course, well, you want the spooky mask. So she ends up stealing one.
She throws the wad of money at him and she's like, here's your money, and runs out.
Well, because he's like, these aren't for sale. No, it doesn't matter. So she just, she understands that she's living in a capitalistic society, and that's how all transactions function, is if you give somebody money, then they have no qualm with you.
Sure.
So she just grabs the mask and throws like, here's your $30 or whatever, bails.
It was cold hearted. She's like, here's your money. Bye. It's, at this point you're just like, okay, this is cute. It's not poorly directed. The one thing that I found, I guess, a little structurally grating about it is like all of the fake outs, because Goosebumps books, as written by R.L. Stine and whoever else he had writing them, were dependent upon fake out cliffhangers at the end of every short chapter. So it's a bunch of short chapters. There's a little fake out cliffhanger at the end of every single one. Well, towards the end, they usually weren't fake outs, but like at the beginning, first act of the story, it was like, they're all for fake outs.
Oh, the first chapter one was always a fake out.
And usually unrelated to whatever else is going on. So here it's,
right.
Kids reaching their hands up through a pile of leaves to grab Carly Beth's ankles or whatever. And I'm like, that's not even about a haunted mask. Or there's a worm in her sandwich. Like,
that follows through with pretty much every episode. And also, just because of the way this dealt with broadcasting, was like you'd watch the credits sequence and it would start and it went up to, as soon as they were done listing the opening credits, you got a commercial break.
Yeah.
Like, so the opening of the episodes are all almost like really short, and they all have to have that big fake out scare. Yes, I will say, I wish it would have been fun to watch this the way it was originally broadcast, because splitting it up in two parts, the place that they split it is like,
it makes no sense.
It was never intended to like be done that way.
Right. It wasn't intended to end there and then have credits and then another part, opening credits. Yeah. It's such an awkward ending. So it feels structurally very weird to split it there, but that's what they had to do because it was, the 21-minute mark or whatever it was.
Right. But yes, Carly Beth steals the mask. She puts it on and it's very spooky, scary. She seems to be putting on a particular voice for it.
They do something really interesting when she first puts it on. It's almost like they don't glue the mask down to her face in certain places, so it kind of fits a little bit more loosely, and the mouth doesn't move quite as in an articulate way. And maybe this is just me making it up, like even all these years later. But when she first wears it, it looks like a mask. But the longer she wears it, and this is the whole conceit of the story, is like it gradually becomes her skin.
Well, there's an effect of that in the episode. Is the first time she puts it on, it's like, yeah, it looks like a mask, but she's acting really weird and scary and putting on a weird voice. And somebody asks, like, how did you, I think her little brother says, like, how did you make the voice? And she's like, I don't know. It just came out of me. And then the second time she puts it on, she's standing in front of a mirror and she puts it on and we see the mask almost sort of vacuum form to her. It's very subtle.
It's cool. What they've done is they've actually taken the edges of the eye holes of the mask and blended them using prosthetics with her actual eyelids. So her real eyes show through the mask really, really well. And it's totally crucial to the look of it really working.
Well, I mean, it becomes a story point eventually.
Also, as it goes on, she's able to articulate the mouth better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the mouth opens a little bit more.
Yep.
But yes, eventually that becomes a story point with her eyes, where she looks in the mirror and is like, those aren't my eyes.
Yeah.
Which is maybe my favorite bit of horror in the story.
Sure.
Like, that's something that transcends being, directed at kids or anything. The idea of looking into a mirror and seeing eyes that aren't yours in your head is like, what the fuck? That's weird and scary.
Yeah, as a kid, that would have been a freaky idea. The other thing that doesn't quite work as well is that her mom, who looks bizarrely like Shelley Duvall. It's not Shelley Duvall, but it looks so much like Shelley Duvall. I was like, what? Her mom is like an artsy fartsy kind of nice lady, and she made Carly Beth's head as a plaster of Paris duplicate for reasons. And Carly Beth says, okay, what I'll do is I'll incorporate this plaster of Paris head into my costume. I'll put it on a broomstick and stick a yellow hanky under it, or a red hanky under it, to make it look like gore. Gradually that becomes like the thing that absorbs Carly Beth's head energy, I guess you could say. Like, that becomes
soul.
Kind of like her real head or soul. And you see it, it has expressions from time to time. Sometimes it says, help me, I'm Carly Beth, or whatever.
Yes. Well, the incorporation eventually, Carly Beth in the mask says, it's like, no, like I took Carly Beth's head. This is now my face. I've taken over Carly Beth's body. And it's like, oh, okay, it's cool. And that is in the book, that whole plaster of Paris thing. It even comes back around in the second book.
Huh.
The production, I think, is fine. I think the story's fun. Obviously, pretty much all the Goosebumps stories always end with the kids get out of danger, but then there's the implication, that hook of like, oh, but something else bad could happen.
Sure, yeah, it's a classic horror ending. I really like that this nails the feeling of like kids on Halloween. Like it's perfect kid on Halloween programming. It really is.
It really, I highly recommend it for any young kids.
Yeah.
For the holiday.
That's not to say it's perfect cinema or anything like that. I'm not going like this is 5-star cinema. No, it's fine.
It's okay for things to just to be pleasant. It's like that was a pleasant experience.
Absolutely. Now it should be noted this got 14 million viewers when it premiered on Halloween of 1995. 14 million.
Yeah, people used to watch TV.
Yeah.
Like, now they it's like if anything got 14 million today, it would be, oh my God, the most gargantuan thing ever.
It would get huge fucking headlines.
Yeah. The only stuff that gets stuff like that is like football games or something.
Sure. It's the only thing today that's like appointment television for people. Nowadays, stuff like this is not appointment television. They'll watch it at their convenience. But back then on Halloween night, this was appointment television. Kids around the U.S. were watching this really fucking tuned in.
Well, especially, again, horror for kids. And that this was a popular thing that, was, it was marketed to death, but it's cool to think that something like that, maybe like the equivalent today would be something like Stranger Things, because like I'm sure kids have Stranger Things backpacks and stuff. Like I had a Goosebumps backpack. The thing changes and it's different things, but it being so popular was actually part of the reason it was cool, because it was like, hey, everybody likes Goosebumps. Like,
sure.
Everybody likes this horror thing that I thought I was potentially weird for having an interest in. And certainly at that age, I wasn't like a diehard horror kid. I was still scared to look at the horror movies in the video store. But stuff like Goosebumps and Are You Afraid of the Dark made horror accessible. And it was like, I was still scared by it. There were episodes of Are You Afraid of the Dark where I would like click the channel back and forth. Cause like, no, it's too scary right now.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, but it was nice knowing that there was a market for kids horror that was specifically designed for our age group. Even though it may have pushed personal boundaries for you and me.
Well, yeah. Well, that's the thing, is that having it does something like Goosebumps where it's like, yeah, we're trying to scare kids, but we're also trying to scare just kids. So we're not going to go too far into certain areas. So there's always this protective safety layer. Even as a kid, I knew that, where it was like, well, they're not really going to go out of the way, over the top with something so horrendous, because even as a kid, I was like, I know this is a kid's show. And Goosebumps, I think, when I talk about some other episodes, maybe I'll bring some of that stuff up. But the other two-parter that we watched, that was also part of the first season, is The Werewolf of Fever Swamp, because we really like werewolves, and there's a handful of werewolf Goosebumps episodes. This one probably being the best, and this one is I think probably close to our hearts a little bit, being a swamp story,
and also set in Florida,
and being you don't get werewolves in swamps, which is like, oh, that's a cool locale.
Sure.
Our lead in this is was it Brendan Thatcher?
Brendan Fletcher.
Fletcher.
Yeah, so Brendan Fletcher is, interestingly enough, also in 2 Ginger Snaps movies, so he's got a little bit of a werewolf pedigree, I guess, being in this before he ever was in a Ginger Snap.
He's also a regular in a bunch of Uwe Boll movies, so he's worked with an actual werewolf.
Yeah, I think he's the lead in the Rampage movies.
Yep, and he just showed up in Alone in the Dark, which I watched recently.
Good for him.
He's in, most people probably know him from Freddy vs. Jason.
Yeah, he is in Freddy vs. Jason. Yep.
But so he's the lead, and as with most of these stories, he's either the parents move to a new place or they're visiting a place with other relatives, and it's a spooky place. This one, his parents are some kind of swamp scientists. Oh no, they're doing
some sort of experiment with llamas or alpacas or
deer.
Something.
It was
deer.
They were going to try and see if the deer can acclimate to the swamp ecosystem or something like that.
Sure.
And so they get moved down here, and they're living in, a rickety old place. And there is the neighbor kid that obviously becomes close with Brendan Fletcher. And then there is this spooky swamp hermit. And there is talk about werewolves. There's like, oh, he's a werewolf, and when the full moon comes around, he's going to get you.
It takes a few scenes for this to catch on, but like this feels more expensive and better directed than Haunted Mask.
Yes.
And it takes a few scenes to recognize it, but you're like, this feels more cinematic and more glossy.
This is a more deliberately slower paced story in its first part. Like it really does not take off at all until you get towards the end of part 1.
Oh yeah, it takes a while to get where it's going.
Yeah, it sets itself up well. This is directed by William Fruitt, who would become, I think, the most prolific director on the Goosebumps series. And he was at this point well versed in directing low budget horror. He had directed a bunch of movies, I believe starting in the late 70s and throughout the 80s, stuff like Spasms, I know, which is a people turned into snakes movie.
Sure. He's also a really prolific TV director. I mean, directed 10 episodes of the Friday the 13th series, directed 6 episodes of Poltergeist: The Legacy, 27 episodes of Goosebumps, 4 episodes of Animorphs.
Yeah. Oh, that was, went to the next Scholastic production.
Yep, exactly.
But William Fruitt, the point being that...
Wait, he directed Blue Monkey.
He did, yes. We watched that. Also known as Insect. So the point being that William Fruitt, he had a filmmaker's eye, and he brought that to certainly The Werewolf of Fever Swamp. Again, not that this is like amazing cinema, but it is like there's legit mood. There's a feeling of making the production value work for you as best as you can.
Yeah.
And again, there's a better flow to the story as it progresses. The Werewolf of Fever Swamp does eventually give us a werewolf. It is a, what would you say, like a humanoid, bipedal werewolf for the most part, which means
for the most part, yeah,
guy in a suit. But our first real glimpse of it is pretty darn good.
They shoot some extreme close-ups of some of its features. Like they show its claws in close-up, they show its mouth in close-up, and it's nicely articulated, and there's drool, and it's like, yeah, this, for a kid's TV show werewolf, like this is great.
It's so good, I believe they reused that werewolf in a later episode.
That does not surprise me one bit.
Yes.
Welcome to the Canadian economy of kids' horror television shows.
So, I mean, of course, it then becomes who's the werewolf? Well, of course, it's got to be the scary swamp permit who lives out in the swamp and is seen. I think because that's the thing is in the first part we don't see the werewolf. It's like the kid like sneaking around. It's Brendan Fletcher like sneaking around the hermit's shack,
yeah,
and believing he's the werewolf and seeing him like howl and
there's some tragic backstory for the swamp permit
that we find out, yeah, very quickly.
There's also a dog that is an intentional misdirect.
Yes, Vandal.
Vandal. I was about to call it Bandit. Thank you.
That's Johnny Quest. But, yes, there's a dog. It's like, who's the dog? The werewolf? What's going on? Does the dog know about the werewolf? Something. But eventually, of course, the werewolf has to be the neighbor kid.
Yep.
Because, that's
the twist. It's a good misdirect. It's fine.
Yeah. Again, you got to think about like, this was TV G7.
Right.
So like, G7-year-olds aren't going to be as tuned into the obvious plot machinations of these kinds of stories.
Yeah. This is middle grade fiction. It is not meant to be complex.
Exactly. So I quite enjoyed The Werewolf of Fever Swamp. It's while I'd say if you're going to watch one this Halloween, The Haunted Mask, because it's the Halloween one, and it's at this point like, now Slappy's the mascot, but for a long time The Haunted Mask was the most recognizable thing from the Goosebumps brand.
It was a popular face, and of course people are freaked out by dummies and dolls and that kind of stuff, and that catches on. Oddly enough, I don't remember. I could easily be proven wrong. I don't remember a scary clown from a Goosebumps story.
I'm sure there was eventually in one of those, Give Yourself Goosebumps or Goosebumps 2000 or Goosebumps Horrorland.
I hated the fucking Choose Your Own Adventure stuff, man. I've never liked Choose Your Own Adventure stuff. But suffice to say, like Werewolf of Fever Swamp is, I think, a better indicator of the promise of the Goosebumps TV show, where it's like, oh, we can actually kind of do this as like legit kids horror. Like I was reminded in a lot of scenes of this of like, oh, this kind of looks like Pumpkinhead.
Yeah.
This whole production and this whole kind of vibe and the score, I was like very reminded of Stan Winston's Pumpkinhead in a pleasant way.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Goosebumps, like overall, I would say Are You Afraid of the Dark is by far the better show in terms of its writing. Goosebumps, unfortunately, was somewhat hindered by having source material. And granted, a lot of the episodes diverged from that source material quite a lot, But there was a particular, like we said at the beginning, kind of a promise with Goosebumps that was different than something like Are You Afraid of the Dark? And Goosebumps delivers on that. Like it's a very monstery, effects heavy show. It's cheap effects, but it's effects heavy.
Yeah. The only thing I wish in hindsight was that they had taken more cues from the art of illustrator Tim Jacobus.
Sure.
Because that to me was the iconic look of Goosebumps, like the haunted mask. The one that they actually designed for the show, it's pretty good looking, but it doesn't look like the one from the book.
No.
And I feel like having that iconic imagery in the show would...
Yeah, it might be more indelible.
Yeah, because that artwork I find certainly indelible. I don't know what the fuck Scholastic was thinking, that they should replace it. I guess they wanted to get a fresh look.
They probably wanted to pay somebody cheaper than maybe, having to repay Tim Jacobus for using his art.
I don't know how that works, but
I will say you can go to Tim Jacobus's website and buy some of his Goosebumps prints.
That's wonderful because they're great. The Tim Jacobus prints that really, made their mark on me were like, Deep Trouble, with the big hammerhead shark on it. Of course, that was going to make a big mark on me.
Oh yeah, I love that one.
Sharks.
Yeah, I think he sells that one, which I thought, because I was thinking about that while I was watching the series, was like, if I was going to own a Tim Jacobus print, what would it be?
Yeah.
Deep Trouble definitely came up. The Haunted Mask is great. His artwork alone is maybe more potent than the actual stories.
Yeah, I would say that the artwork promises a lot that the stories rarely deliver on. The imagery is so strong and often so surreal that it's like there's no way that the kind of prose that R.L. Stine wrote for these, or whoever he had writing for him, it's like there's no way it can really deliver. And there's like this really vintage airbrushed look to them. There's a softness and a glowingness to them, like kind of haze. Mm-hmm. They really do leap off the covers of those books and make them so perfect.
This is going to sound like a dig, and I mean it in the complete opposite way. It's like the most optimal version of van art.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. That sort of soft airbrush look does remind me of van art. And, I really like how he plays with perspective. Like if you see anything with straight lines in his art, he curves those straight lines really, really hard. If you look at the cover for, what is it? Egg Monsters from Mars or whatever. I forget it's
Yeah.
It's
the Egg Monsters one. Yeah.
Yeah. Egg Monsters from Mars. Like all of the straight lines of the kitchen countertops and the kitchen floor, it's all curved. It's like, wow, it's almost like camera lens distortion. Or, Piano Lessons Can Be Murder. It's not a straight set of piano keys. It curves really, really dramatically. So it's a really cool look. And I really greatly admire what he did for it. If only there was some sort of incarnation of Goosebumps that really paid, homage to that in a pleasant way. I think that would be fun to see.
How is there not an animated Goosebumps at this point? With the Jacobus art as a jumping off point for the style guide.
Oof, that'd be tough to replicate in 2D with that level of, that kind of level of detail that he used to pack into those things.
Oh, sure. I mean, you can't animate airbrush stuff. It's just, you could, but it's going to be, nobody's going to pay money to do that.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of the design, because like, for example, Slappy, who became, kind of the mascot now of Goosebumps, they have Slappy episodes in the show, and it's an extremely radically different take than the Jacobus artwork.
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's certainly evocative of the Jacobus artwork, but it doesn't. It doesn't.
A big fat head like on the show. Like
Slappy's gonna come get you for saying that.
Yeah, I mean they made Slappy technically look better in the movies, but his design was more boring. It's just much more stripped down.
Yeah.
But I mean the original Night of the Living Dummy covers, it's fucking creepy.
Sure.
I'm looking at it right now. Go to everybody. If you like this stuff at all, go to Tim Jacobus's website, and I might end up buying one of these prints.
I wouldn't mind having one myself. I really think Jacobus is as indelible an illustrator as somebody like Stephen Gamble, who did the illustrations for Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark.
100% agree. Yeah.
The style was just as strong.
It was something that immediately sold you on the tone of the stories. In both instances, the Gamble artwork made those stories so much scarier.
Well, and both of them as illustrators had such distinct styles. You could really tell their styles immediately upon looking, oh, that's a Stephen Gamble thing. Oh, that's a Tim Jacobus illustration. So,
yep. So we love Tim Jacobus, as you could tell, and his work for Goosebumps. as I said, I took it upon myself to watch every episode of the original Goosebumps series, something I'd never done before. And out of the, I believe, 73 episodes, other than the 2 that we talked about, which I would also recommend, I have about 12 episodes that I noted down that were worth checking out. The Girl Who Cried Monster, I would recommend this one. It's a really kind of gross monster thing where it's like, oh, this girl thinks her librarian is a monster, and check it out, he is. The Jacobus cover for this one isn't actually as good as what they do with the monster in the episode.
Interesting. Okay.
Haunted Mask 2 is pretty good. They knew that the Haunted Mask was their bread and butter. They got both Catherines, short and long, to come back for the episode. But this one, the mask is instead an old man mask. And I had this on audio cassette when I was a kid, so I have a nostalgic attachment to it. But it's pretty good because they knew the Haunted Mask was money for them. So they spent some good money again on the makeup effects and everything for the mask. The Scarecrow Walks at Midnight. Not a great episode, but killer scarecrows, and they're pretty fun. And because they were scarecrows, it's one of the times the show got to be kind of violent because they all get thrown into like a harvester at the end.
Whoa, okay.
And that like breaks into a barn or something and chops them all up. And of course, it's all straw, so it's like, hey, great, TVY7.
Who had the better killer scarecrow moment? That episode of Goosebumps or the film adaptation of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark?
I mean, Scary Stories has the budget to actually do something. Also, the Are You Afraid of the Dark episode, The Tale of the Silent Servant, is my personal creepiest scarecrow.
Really? Okay.
Just the design of it it's got this human face looking mask on it. It's so creepy. I'll have to share that with you.
The Silent Servant. See. Okay.
How to Kill a Monster. This isn't a great episode, but it has a big fucking monster puppet. Like a big child-sized monster puppet with a big elongated neck that moves around, and it's kind of like bird-like looking. They made a big fucking real rubber monster, so I got to give them props for that.
Yeah.
Welcome to Dead House, which is the first in the Goosebumps book series. This is another 2-parter. This one is kind of weird, creepy in a good way. It ends up, spoiler alert, being about an entire kind of neighborhood that are zombies. And it's because there was some kind of like ecological poisoning in the water supply that killed everyone and then turned them into zombies. And it's the one that flirts the most with being like a little more rough in terms of the horror. It's not like violent, but by the end, this crew got to basically do a Night of the Living Dead riff where like hands are busting through walls trying to grab at these kids and stuff, and everybody's
pretty fun.
Pallid gray makeup, and there's even like parts of their skin that are starting to like fleck off. Like it's I was kind of surprised. I was like, this seems a little harder edge than the usual Goosebumps fare.
What's funny is it's the first Goosebumps book in the series. Of course, incredible artwork from Jacobus. The tagline on the front is, "It will just kill you." It'll just kill you. It'll just kill you. Yeah.
It'll just kill you.
It'll just kill you.
The next episode would be The Blob That Ate Everyone, which is a great Tim Jacobus cover, but it's not really a giant blob story. It's a magical typewriter story, which every good anthology series does a magical typewriter story. Are You Afraid of the Dark did it. Tales from the Dark Side did it, and that's a Stephen King magical typewriter one.
Wait, does the Goosebumps movie have a magical typewriter in it?
I don't think the typewriter's magical. The whole deal is it's the stories that R.L. Stine has written, his actual manuscripts, and they open up and break out, and they contain the Goosebumps.
Huh. Wonder why they're magical. Okay.
Whatever. It might be. I don't think they ever center it on the typewriter, but
okay.
But it's a pretty fun, good little magic typewriter episode. Night of the Living Dummy 3, which is the second Night of the Living Dummy episode, because the first Night of the Living Dummy episode is Night of the Living Dummy 2. That's not confusing. So Night of the Living Dummy 3 is the second Slappy episode. The first Slappy episode's not bad, but this one, they got a little bit more budget. You get to see Slappy running around a little bit more. And the big cherry on top is that in the end, Slappy is struck by lightning while on the roof of a house and fucking explodes.
Whoa.
Big kaboom, blowing up the dummy. I mean, joyous, just joyous. Pretty good. If you're going to watch any of the Slappy episodes, watch that one.
Sure.
Shocker on Shock Street. I believe the cover of this one was like a giant metal mantis, like praying mantis.
Yeah.
But the idea is that it's these two kids and they're there with their dad, grandpa, uncle, whatever. It's some Hollywood horror studio that they get to run around in, and stuff seems to be coming to life. So it's like, oh, it's a horror movie set coming to life. So that there's fun stuff, and you can tell that it's like, oh yeah, they're reusing like masks and animatronics and puppets and stuff that have been in previous Goosebumps episodes. So it's a little kind of wink and a nod to the series. My best friend is invisible. I wrote this down, but the only reason I know it's on here is I wrote it as the one of the so bad that you have to see it episodes.
Really? Okay. So how big of a, I don't know, a range would you say there is in this series about like good to bad?
Well, for the most part, especially the last season. The last season was only technically 4 episodes, I believe, but they're all 2-parters.
Huh.
That last season's pretty rough. Like it was not very good. Most of the episodes are just kind of like, that was fine. Or like it just, they pass through so quickly. Not just because of their time limit, but because they're written that way. They're written where there's no fat on these things. Huh. Except for when they did the 2-parters where if they wanted something to breathe a little bit more, like Werewolf of Fever Swamp, then that was there for them. But most of the episodes just go through. The only 2 that I wrote down, My Best Friend is Invisible, which I don't remember the actual story of now, but I just wrote down that it's one of the worst ones, but that made it really entertaining. And then the other one was Don't Go to Sleep, which is an episode where a kid, he always seems to get the breaks, like nobody listens to him, and he goes up into his attic and goes to sleep, and it's just like, man, because everybody's like telling him to kind of like get his head out of the clouds and like deal with reality. And so like he goes to his attic bedroom and is like, man, reality, I hate reality. Which then it turns into this more kind of sci-fi story about he's changing reality around him all the time, and there's these men in black that are trying to chase him down that are, like the reality police. But that like, man, I hate reality.
Oh, it's funny. They should intercut that with what is it, Matt Damon and the Information Bureau or whatever the fuck.
Oh, the Adjustment Bureau.
The Adjustment Bureau. Thank you.
Yes, exactly.
Rewriting reality.
That's essentially what this is the Adjustment Bureau for kids.
Or or Dark City.
Sure. Yeah. Well, Dark City is the good version of doing.
Oh, right. That. Rewriting reality every night. Yeah.
Yes. But Don't Go to Sleep was very funny. This is the only episode I took out of Goosebumps that I didn't read. This is Haunted House Game, which was from, well, because there was I think 1 or 2 or a couple of these that were called Tales to Give You Goosebumps, and they were anthology Goosebumps, and they were all unique stories. But they were even shorter, so it was like very, very. And this one is just 2 kids. They come upon a sad little crying Shining Twins girl in front of a spooky old house. And she's like, my cat ran in there. Can you get it for me? And they go in and they're transported into a big board game that they have to win to get out. There's some kind of story of the board game and the places they're in. It doesn't really matter. But there's like spooky ghost pirates or spooky ghost fishermen. That was like, oh, that was cool and neat. And I like board games as narrative devices, so I just really like this one. It's very like, this is probably the simplest one on my list.
Okay.
But it's just like, yep, simple, easy, boom, done. And the ending is, of course, the girl, they escape, but then the girl's out there getting somebody else like, can you go in and get my cat? It's like, oh, she's evil too. Goosebumps. And then last but not least, Werewolf Skin. I think this was a 2-parter. This is the episode that I believe they reused their werewolf suits from Werewolf of Fever Swamp. This one's interesting because it actually has a cool bit of lore for the werewolves that I've never heard before, in which the werewolves shed their skin every night and they have to hide their skin.
Huh.
And the skin is the source of their power. And so when they don't like, they have to go back and put their skins on, or else they will start to deteriorate and like go crazy and probably eventually die.
Okay.
So there is some actual creepy imagery of this with, people. I mean, I'm sure they weren't really nude, but they're being portrayed as nude, on this kids show, shedding these werewolf skins. And I was like, okay. It's very much the same kind of riff on Werewolf of Fever Swamp. Like, it's a mystery. Who are they? And if you're an adult, you'll know exactly who the werewolves are in like 10 seconds. But it's fun. And they were pretty good with werewolves on the show, I got to say. Which Are You Afraid of the Dark wasn't. There's one werewolf story that's kind of pretty good. And the werewolf does have a cool face. But I think Goosebumps won with werewolves. So, if you want to check out some of those episodes, again, they're really short. It's a fun time. If you got kids, I'm glad this series is on Netflix and so accessible.
It is. I mean, I think it could have aged better. I mean, clearly these aren't being taken care of. These were broadcast in standard NTSC format for the day, and so there are no good masters around. No. They just look like garbage for the most part. But, are kids going to know the difference? Probably not. I've
watched this with actual kids, under the ages of 7, and which means they were breaking the rating. But, that's, I'm a rebel, Dottie. Then they loved it. They liked the spookiness. I think the show is solid enough that a really young audience can still see it and not care and get what's going on. I'm glad it's there. The franchise has changed so much. I didn't see the second Goosebumps movie because after the first one I was like, it's just not for me. Like I'm out of it.
Yeah. I mean, it was like, let's unleash all the monsters. And then I was like, but it's not what I like about, monsters on film. So
sure.
I didn't hate that first Goosebumps movie, but I was like, oh, this isn't for me. And that's okay.
Totally okay.
Yep.
But yes, that will conclude our Halloween celebration selection. I hope you all had a good time. We certainly did. Happy Halloween. I hope you all, if you do celebrate, are having a good time for Halloween. But we will move over to the shelf where we pick a movie or show or something to act as a good pairing or substitute for our main topic. And we want you to go to GenreVision.com and comment on this post with your own shelf picks. And if you do comment with a shelf pick, we will feature it on next week's show because the shelf is a collaborative thing. We're doing it all together here at the GenreVision Movie Club, and we need you to help us fill up the shelf. Travis, what are you going to pull off the shelf for Goosebumps?
I think the closest thing to this for grown-ups is the new Creepshow show on Shudder. I say new. It's in its 3rd season, I think, now, and there's now an animated special and that kind of stuff. So
Mazel tov.
It's been a success for AMC and Shudder. It's building off of a brand I thought would never be rehabilitated or resurrected ever.
Sure.
Creepshow 1 being the absolute masterpiece that it is, directed by George Romero, like that, that kind of spirit, any trace of it surviving to this day, and, people like Greg Nicotero and Joe Lynch and all the wonderful people they bring on to like just make silly monster stories like, for Shudder. It's like, okay, yeah, okay, guys.
Great. I mean,
yeah.
The thing is...
Here's the thing. They're not great.
Well, I can't speak because I've only watched the first season. I can say that the first season, there were maybe 2 or 3 episodes that I thought stood out as something kind of worth your time.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I was like, this just isn't executing on the budget level or in certain instances,
it's so digital looking, which really is,
it feels so much like garage filmmaking. And I'm not saying that negatively because today you can make something that will be professionally distributed in your garage.
Sure.
And it just feels like, well, it's Greg Nicotero's garage. So it's a big garage with a lot of fun toys.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's and here's the thing, I'm not watching the Creepshow series. The Creepshow film is one of my top 10 favorite movies of all time, but I hope that Creepshow show lasts for like 10 seasons.
Absolutely. If it can bring more focus to the original Creepshow, I'm all for it. And I have yet to see an episode of it that I found like really stupid or bad.
Yeah.
They're all just kind of like, oh, that was, cute and fun.
Yeah, I would say out of what I saw the entirety of the first season, there wasn't anything that's like, this is horrendous and I don't want them to be handling the property's name on this kind of stuff. It was like, no, they were fine to forgetable for the most part.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I'm pulling off the shelf this week is Shudder's Creepshow series.
Yeah. Well, I will only also add to it that I would love for the day to see multiple anthology horror series going on that in the spirit of stuff like Tales from the Crypt and Are You Afraid of the Dark, and really Creepshow's the one that's providing that. So they're doing God's work in my eyes. Well, I'm going to pull off the shelf another anthology monster show, and it's a real easy one to remember because it's just called Monsters. This was kind of, now I'll admit, I think I've only seen the first season of this show, and I think it lasted 3 seasons. This was kind of a mythic show for me after a point growing up, because I never saw an episode of it as a kid. It's called Monsters, for God's sake. Like, I have to watch a show called Monsters. And so eventually I did watch, if not the whole season, the majority of the first season with my friend. And I was like, yeah, this is fun. And the whole gimmick is like, yeah, it's going to be people in makeups like every week in some way. The stories that I remember were that kind of same. It's like, that was fine to forgettable. But what was fun were the monsters. It's like, oh yeah, there was some great makeups. And if thinking about Goosebumps, it feels like it was kind of scratching the same very specific horror itch for probably not adults, but maybe like teenagers, like older teenagers were watching Monsters, or like 15-year-olds or something. And they're like, oh yeah.
I'm sure it was fine if you were like 23 and hitting the bong,
That too. I mean, I don't remember, and I didn't research what channel it originally aired on, but when I watched it, it's like, oh no, like it was trying to be another Tales from the Crypt, and all that implies. It's not Tales from the Crypt. That's still the high watermark of American anthology horror television for me.
Sure.
Are You Afraid of the Dark's the better show in my heart, but but Monsters, I think that's one that I hope there are some of our loyal listeners and constant commenters who do know what Monsters is. I would love to see some monster recommendation episodes, and maybe I'll track them down.
There are 72 episodes of that, so Godspeed.
So it's like exactly like Goosebumps. I think Goosebumps is 73.
It's 3 full season orders of 24 episodes. So
there you go. Yeah, I'm not going to sit through all that. But if y'all want to pick out some gems for me, go for it. Now we will hop on over to the listener shelf picks for last week's episode on Bones. I'm so glad we got shelf picks for Bones. Watch Bones. Bacon Lettuce Potato fittingly went with 2 episodes of Tales from the Crypt, Fitting Punishment, and Till Death. Those are both actually really good episodes. And also the Shadow Man episode from the 80s Twilight Zone, another good episode. Bacon Lettuce Potato, you pick good anthology horror episodes. Stabbin' Nesbula went with Tales from the Hood, which, how did we not pick Tales from the Hood?
I know, right?
Like, so everybody watch Tales from the Hood. That's great. I think it's the second best anthology horror movie next to Creepshow.
Yeah. Ooh, well, yeah.
You got Trick or Treat.
We talk about Trick or Treat. We talked about Quiet On. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but Tales from the at least watchable. It's the most watchable, maybe more so than Creepshow.
Okay. Yeah, perhaps.
Eric Spooks went with House of Wax 2005. We just watched that. We're going to talk about that on the extended Currently Consuming that we do for our Patreon members. So you'll get to hear that then. And he apparently teetered with either doing it as a shelf pick or an anti-shelf pick, Leprechaun in the Hood.
Huh.
Which of the 2 Leprechaun in the Hood movies is the better Leprechaun in the Hood movie, I can attest. Ice-T's in it, so it can't be all bad.
Sure.
Mr. Milksteak in the Heart went with House on Haunted Hill, 1999. I'm a booster of that movie. And a Clive Barker story called Conversions of a Pornographer's Shroud, which I believe is one of the tales in one of the Books of Blood. I think he got up to like 5 or 6 Books of Blood after a while. So I've only read a very, very small sampling of stuff from the Books of Blood, and I've never heard of that one. So thank you very much, Mr. Milksteak in the Heart. And thank you to everybody with your shelf picks. Love seeing these and looking forward to the ones next week for Goosebumps. Now, very quick call to action, but stick around because Travis and I are going to top things off with maybe one more extremely fun Halloween recommendation for you to watch this season. But if you love what we do here on the show, we would love it if you went to the Apple Podcast Store and gave the show a rating and a written review. These things are essentially as valuable as cash in the podcast world, and we could always use a couple more dollar bills, yo. So please go to the Apple Podcast Store, rate and review the show. If you leave a written review, even if it's bad, we've done this before, we will feature it on the show. And last but not least, if you really want to become a part of the show, you can go to patreon.com/GenreVision and become a premium subscriber for just $5 a month. That will give you access to all of the bonus material, which is weekly pre-shows that we do. We just did one where it ended up being like a really wistful, heartfelt discussion about Halloween.
Yeah, just kind of evoking the general vibe of Halloween and sort of what that was and what it wasn't. And,
we went in kind of blind. We were just like, we're just going to talk about Halloween, and it turned out to be one of my favorite pre-shows we've done recently.
Yep.
So if you want to check that out, in addition to extended currently consumings that we do once a month and bonus material for all the other GenreVision podcasts, you can go to patreon.com/GenreVision. Let's end with some currently consuming.
Nom, 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 nom.
And Travis and I are going to pick one of the movies we consumed together. This is Demon Wind, which is immediately, obviously, an easy fart joke. But don't be fooled. Demon Wind rocks.
Yeah, I mean, Demon Wind is a hell of a fun time. I didn't really know what to expect other than that. A couple of things that Drew had told me about it. I was like, okay, yeah, I can expect this and I can expect that. What I did not expect was just how much it would throw at us. This movie is not ever reaching for ideas. It's just like, it's got a gazillion things up its sleeve and it wants to throw every single one of them at you.
Well, what's interesting is the movie, it's the most easy to compare to is The Evil Dead.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that lightly. Not only is it a very familiar formula of a bunch of people go out to an isolated location in the woods that Evil Dead made popular, but it's Evil Dead in a lot of times in tone and certainly in the absolute overflowing amount of concepts and ideas that they want to do. And they don't really care how to explain them.
No, not at all. I mean, it's like one non sequitur to another. The cool thing about it is that like not a single one of them is a bad time.
No, they're all fun.
The whole idea of like, yeah, teens or I guess college students go out to a remote cabin and like bad shit happens. This is one of the more fun executions of that because of just how like wacky and how far reaching it is. It's ultimately a story about like, oh, they get attacked by demons and yeah, the son of Satan is, brought up, there's going to be some like, I don't know, resurrect the Antichrist or whatever.
Whatever. The story of Demon Wind is so inconsequential and it kind of knows it.
It's all about just executing fun sequence after fun sequence. And again, who cares if it doesn't make any fucking sense?
I don't want to spoil a whole bunch of gags, but I'll take one to give an example that I think will illustrate what we're talking about. When they get to this burned down farm, essentially, a woman is turned into a doll by lasers, magic.
Yeah, sure.
She's turned into a doll. A person picks up the doll and the doll goes, "You lied." And then it explodes.
Yeah. There's this bizarre non sequitur after that where they just forget about the character.
Yes, there is no mourning point for the character.
Nobody sits around and goes, "Oh, poor Cheryl, she was my girlfriend and I loved her so much." They're just like, "Oh shit."
Yeah, we better go into the farm. It's one. There's so much. This is such a treasure trove of a movie when it comes to. It's one of those great movies where you can just continuously say, "Do you remember this thing happened?" And eventually you will have forgotten some insane thing that happened during Demon Wind.
There's a barn and mounted on the wall in the barn is a cow's skull who I never thought in a million years it would grow a tongue tentacle and munch a lady's head. I was like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a great movie to go out on for our Halloween episode, because it really does celebrate the wackiness and the fun of Halloween and horror. And we hope you were able to enjoy some of the wackiness and fun this month with our Halloween celebration. Next month, we're doing a grab bag month. I think it's been a while since we've done one of these. And we are going to start with one of the biggest, most talked about movies of the year. That's right. It's Denis Villeneuve's Dunk.
Dune.
Yeah. We're getting Duned next week. It's currently available to stream on HBO Max if you're a subscriber. That's how Travis and I watched it. And we're going to be talking about Dune. And I think it's going to be a pretty heavy episode.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I certainly have a lot of thoughts on it and Dune in general. Like, it's,
Sure.
I will say that, you know, even before we get there, it's been a success in getting Dune spoken about in pop culture.
Yeah, can't debate that. I will recommend everybody go listen to our Dune 1984 episode on the David Lynch movie. I'm going to re-listen to that.
Yeah, also, read the fucking book. Read the
yes.
fucking book.
Did you read Dune Messiah?
The second one in the series? Yeah, I read Dune Messiah.
Okay, I've only ever read Dune, so I'm very limited in my Dune knowledge. But we'll talk about that next week. Our relationship with Dune and our relationship with this version of the story. We hope you'll be there. As always, we want to thank you so much for listening. I'm Drew Deitch.
I'm Travis Newton.
And we will see you next week.
Right here on GenreVision.
Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween, everybody.